Okay, the
Okay.
recording is live. Thank you. Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, it says it's recording. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to turn off my camera while I present, else I'm going to get too distracted here. All right. Let me find the presentation. Okay, where did it go? All right. Thank you, Elise, for inviting me to come and present today. As Elise said, I'm a project manager for the Corps of Engineers working in our Western section. So I process applications on the west side of the state and in the Upper Peninsula. I've worked for the Corps for 24 years. Today, I'm going to start with some basics of our permitting program and then walk you through the steps of getting a permit and more details about some of our various types of permits. The mission of our regulatory program is to provide strong protection of the nation's aquatic environment, and we do that through permit evaluation and enforcement of permitting laws. We have two main statutory authorities for the regulatory program. The first is Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1899, under which we regulate structures and work in navigable waters of the U.S. This includes projects such as dredging and placement of fill material in the waterway, and regulated structures, which can be seasonal, temporary, or permanent. The second authority is Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, under which we regulate discharges of dredged or fill material into waters of the U.S., including wetlands. Under Section 10, our regulations define navigable waters as waters that are subject to the ebb and flow of the tides, which obviously you don't really need to worry about here in Michigan, and or waters that are used, were used, or could be used to transport interstate or foreign commerce. As far as waters of the U.S., these are navigable waters of the U.S., tributaries to the navigable waters, and wetlands that are adjacent to those waters. And as a lot of you have probably heard, the recent Sackett decision from the Supreme Court changed the definition of adjacency and waters of the U.S. And there's still a lot of court cases involved with waters of the U.S., and the definitions changed a lot over the past few years. I think it was at least three times in last year alone. So I suggest that if you're not sure if a wetland on your property is in our jurisdiction, that you contact us to perform a jurisdictional determination. So if you want to know what parts of your property are in our jurisdiction, you can request this jurisdictional determination by either filling out this form on our website or by using our new regulatory request system, which just went live yesterday, and the link is on the slide. And you can also use the regulatory request system to request a pre-application meeting now. So for the jurisdictional determination, we will come out to your property free of charge and determine whether there are jurisdictional waterways or wetlands on your property. You can request a JD in association with a project you're proposing or on its own with no project proposed. And Section 404 is a little bit different in Michigan than in most of the US. The state, through Eagle, has assumed part of this Section 404 permit program for the interior waters of the state. And in these areas, most of the time you don't need to get a Corps permit. The Corps has retained its regulatory program responsibilities over the navigable waters of the U.S., so all the Section 10 waters, as well as any wetlands adjacent to those waters. And our jurisdictional limit for waterways is at the ordinary high water mark. This is defined as a line on the shore established by the fluctuations of water and indicated by physical characteristics such as a clear, natural line impressed on the bank, shelving, changes in the character of soil, destruction of terrestrial vegetation, the presence of litter and debris, or other appropriate means that consider the characteristics of the surrounding areas. And here's just two examples of an ordinary high watermark. On the left, the ordinary high watermark is located at the toe of this vegetated dune on Lake Michigan, and on the right, it can be found along the seawall. And here's some activities that might require a permit from the Corps. I'll just go through them quickly. Seawalls and the associated backfill, riprap or revetments, dredging, and the placement of fill in wetlands or in waterways, stairs that extend beyond the ordinary high water mark, which is seen here, and temporary construction measures, such as in this photo, the fill pad that's in the waterway and the silt curtain would both require a permit. So there are four main steps in our permit evaluation process, which include an optional pre-application meeting, the submission of a permit application, the Corps' evaluation and coordination of the application, and the decision or outcome of the permit process. Pre-application meetings are entirely optional. We hold them at your request and they're free. These meetings are not reserved for developers with large or complex projects. It's available to anyone and is useful for both our understanding of your project and your understanding of our program, and as well as an opportunity to discuss reducing impacts of proposed projects. A pre-application meeting can be a formal process where we meet you on site or in our office, but it can also be as informal as a phone call or an email. We're happy to answer your questions. These meetings are very useful to streamline the permit evaluation process, especially for complex projects. And whether or not you take advantage of the pre-application meeting, the next step is to submit a permit application through the My Enviro portal link, which Eagle hosts. And on there, you can fill out the Eagle USACE joint permit application, which can be used for any permit request. And although it's one application, each agency conducts a separate review process and comes to a separate independent permit decision. In most cases, you'll require both the Eagle permit and the Corps permit before you start work. And for the few times when you need a Corps permit but not an Eagle permit, you can fill out this application, which is found on our website. Most of the time when I see this, it's for projects on tribal land where you do need a federal permit but not a state permit. Review of the application begins when we determine that we have all the information needed for the application to be considered complete. The best thing you can do to ensure that you receive a timely permit decision is to provide a complete application package. If we do request additional information from you, the faster you provide it, the faster we can continue our review. And drawings are one of the most important parts of the permit application. And this is an example of sample drawings for a dock. The plan view drawings on the left, which is as if you're looking down on the property from above. A good plan view drawing includes property lines, a north arrow, the relationship of the property to the aquatic resource, dimensions of the structure or fill, distances to a permanent fixed point, and other structures on the property. The cross-section drawing, which is here on the right, which is as if you were looking at the project from the side. In this case, you will need to include the length and height of the structure, its relationship to the shoreline, and the water level. Once we determine that your permit application is complete, we begin our review. There are two main categories of permits: general, and individual. The review process is different for different permit types. The type of permit your project qualifies for depends on the type of project and the extent and nature of impacts to waterways and wetlands. General permits include regional and nationwide permits. They authorize certain categories of activities such as docks, seawalls, maintenance work, and many shore protection projects. These categories of activities have been reviewed in advance and determined to have minimal individual and cumulative impacts. Therefore, the evaluation process is simpler and faster for these types of permits. This is a great reason to take advantage of pre-application meetings with core staff. We can discuss ways to tailor your project to meet the general permit criteria. Projects that don't qualify for general permits are evaluated as individual permits and are subject to a more intensive review. Letters of permission have an abbreviated agency coordination process and can authorize structures and dredging in navigable waters without a fill component. Standard permits have a more intensive review process, which includes a public notice and an environmental assessment, which weighs the benefits and detriments of a project to the public interest. And from 2020 to 2023, 42% of the permits that were issued by the Detroit District were verified under our regional permit categories, and 46 were verified under nationwide permit categories. 3% were issued as letters of permission, and 3% were issued as standard permits. And we also have a programmatic general permit, which is what the PGP is, which is only effective in Indiana. Each of our general permits are issued on a 5-year basis. Our regional general permit is specific to activities in Michigan. Although the nationwide permit is issued at a national level, our district adds regional conditions to some nationwide permits that are applicable to projects in Michigan. And in some cases, we determine that a nationwide permit category doesn't apply in Michigan. You can find details about the terms and conditions of the general permits on our website. When you submit an application for a project that might qualify under our general permits, we verify whether the proposed work qualifies under the regional or nationwide permit terms and conditions, and we might add special conditions to the product to minimize impacts. One thing to note is that the Detroit District requires submission of an application for any work that might require regional or nationwide permit verifications. We don't have any non-reporting general permits in Michigan, which is different from some other core districts. And this pie chart shows the most commonly used regional permits in Michigan over the past several years. Over half of the permits we verified under the regional permit were for seawalls and backfill, docks, and boat hoist. There are 59 nationwide permit categories at the national level, 47 which are available for use in Michigan. And here are the most commonly used nationwide permits over the past several years, with bank stabilization being the most common, and followed by maintenance. On our website, you can download the full public notice that lists all the regional and nationwide permits and their terms and conditions in Michigan. Each nationwide permit and regional permit category has its terms listed. The top part of all of them, this one is a specifically nationwide permit for mooring buoys, includes the terms of the nationwide permit at the national level. And the second part shows the Detroit District's regional conditions for this nationwide permit. The project would need to meet all the terms and conditions of the nationwide or the regional to qualify. For most categories, there's also a list of additional conditions for Eagle Water Quality Certification and Coastal Zone Management Act consistency. If a project meets all these conditions, the Corps might be able to verify the general permit before Eagle issues a permit. If not, we'd have to wait for Eagle to complete the review and issue a 401 certification before we can verify that your project meets that particular general permit. Next, I'm going to discuss a few of the most commonly used general permits. I'll talk about some of the key general permit criteria here, but I'm not going to go through all the criteria for each permit type. Our regional permit covers a lot of common structures, including many seawalls. To qualify, replacement seawalls must be placed so that the waterward face of the new seawall is no more than 1 foot waterward of the existing seawall. And for new seawalls, Eagle will need to issue their permit before the Corps can verify whether the project qualifies for a regional permit. The regional permit limits the location where new seawalls can be placed to the average seasonal high water elevation of the waterway. You can find that specific elevation in the regional permit itself. Seawalls placed waterward of that contour would not qualify for a regional permit. The regional permit for riprap limits the length of the riprap along the shoreline to 300 feet in length. The riprap can extend no more than 5 feet waterward of the Corps' ordinary high water mark, and it can be at no more than a 1 to 1.5 slope. Nationwide Permit 13, which is bank stabilization, is typically used to authorize riprap, revetments, and other bank stabilization projects that have minimal impacts. Some of the key conditions are listed here. Some of the limits on Nationwide 13 can be waived if we determine the project would have minimal impacts and after we coordinate the project with state and federal resource agencies. That coordination adds 10 to 25 days to our review process, and we'll consider those comments when we determine whether or not the project qualifies for the nationwide permit. Letters of permission can only be used for Section 10 work, so no fill material. For letters of permission, the Corps conducts an abbreviated coordination with adjacent property owners and agencies, including Eagle, the Environmental Protection Agency, Fish and Wildlife Service, and DNR Fisheries Division. And those agencies have 15 days to comment on the proposed work. If we receive comments, we'll try to resolve any issues with the applicant. But if the issues can't be resolved, then the project may be elevated to the standard permit review process. After the coordination period ends and any comments have been coordinated, we move forward to a permit decision. Letters of permission are usually valid for 3 years from the date of issuance. And standard permits have a more intensive review process. Once we receive a complete application, we publish a public notice, which typically allows 20 days for comments. If we receive comments, we provide them to the applicant and give them an opportunity to respond to them. If we have specific concerns about the project, we might ask you to address those concerns at the same time, and we often request an alternatives analysis at this stage. We'll consider the comments and your response as we prepare an environmental assessment. Some of the components of the environmental assessment include our public interest review, a 404B1 guidelines analysis, if applicable, and an alternatives analysis. As part of the review of any submitted work, the Corps will consider whether or not the proposed work might affect federally listed threatened or endangered species or designated critical habitat. The first step in considering threatened and endangered species is to determine whether they might be present on a site. Sometimes a site visit by the Corps staff might be sufficient to determine whether species or their habitat is present. In other cases, we might ask you to provide a survey for the species. Some species, such as pitcher's thistle, just seen here, are relatively obvious, but others, such as bats or mussel species, might be harder to detect. Surveys need to be done by qualified personnel, and in general should conform to applicable survey protocols. If listed species are present or might be present, we consider whether they might be impacted by the proposed work. The Corps is responsible for making a determination of effect for listed species. If there's no effect at all, then coordination with Fish and Wildlife Service would not be required. If the project might affect a listed species or critical habitat, then we do have to consult with Fish and Wildlife Service. We might coordinate with you to determine whether impacts to the federally listed species can be avoided or minimized. In some cases, permit modifications or special conditions might be needed to avoid, minimize, or mitigate for impacts to listed species. Some examples of special conditions that might be required include timing restrictions on when work can be conducted or monitoring for the presence of species during construction. In addition to the Endangered Species Act, the Corps is also responsible for compliance with the National Historic Preservation Act. During the evaluation of each project, we identify any historic properties that might be located in the permit area. If any historic properties might be present, we make a determination of effect, and we consult with the State Historic Preservation Office if there's any potential to affect a historic property. We also consult with tribal historic preservation officers, or THIPOs, for historic and cultural resources. The consultation process can also involve public input, and we identify and consult with any interested consulting parties, such as local historical societies as well. To be considered a historic property, the property must be either listed on the National Register of Historic Places or be eligible for listing based on their historic significance or potential to yield information about the past. This can include historic districts, sites, buildings, structures, and objects. So this is pretty broad. People usually think of historic buildings, but historic properties can also include shipwrecks, parks, and bridges. Archaeological sites can also be historic properties, although they can be more difficult to identify if all the resources are below the ground surface. If a project involves ground disturbance in an area that might not have been disturbed previously, we might ask you to provide an archaeological survey conducted by a qualified archaeologist. If we determine that the proposed project would have an adverse effect on a historic property, possible ways to minimize or mitigate for these impacts could include modifying the project to avoid or minimize impacts to historic properties, rehabilitation or repair of a historic structure, such as a bridge in kind instead of changing its design. Relocating a historic structure out of the project area might be an option in some cases. Documentation and data recovery might be an option when a historic property or archaeological site would be destroyed, and it could involve preparation of a report documenting the historic property's historical context and significance. Another critical component of the Corps' permit decision process is our 404B1 guidelines analysis, which applies to projects involving discharges of dredged or filled material. Under the guidelines, only the least environmentally damaging practicable alternative is permittable. It's also called LEDPA. The guidelines also set up the mitigation sequence we consider for all projects. First, you have to avoid all impacts if at all possible. Then unavoidable impacts must be minimized to the extent practicable. And only after you've done those two do we consider compensatory mitigation, which might be necessary for any remaining unavoidable impacts. Compensatory mitigation is not considered in our alternatives analysis, and we can't consider compensatory mitigation proposed in lieu of avoidance and minimization. If we identify any apparent alternatives that might be less environmentally damaging than the proposed project, We might ask you for your input on whether those alternatives are practicable. Practicable means that the alternative must be available and capable of being done after taking into consideration cost, existing technology, and logistics in light of the overall project purpose. And here's an impact reduction example where we're looking at the cross section of a shore protection project involving riprap and backfill to protect this slope. An alternative that could minimize impacts in this case might involve moving the riprap back to the existing slope as far as possible and reducing the backfill behind the riprap. The specific purpose for a project is an important aspect of our alternatives analysis. If the project involves wetland fill, we'll consider whether the basic project purpose is water dependent. For example, if the basic irreducible purpose of a project is housing, that's not water dependent. So if the basic purpose isn't water dependent, then we're required to presume that a practicable alternatives are available that don't involve wetland fill and that these alternatives are less damaging. The applicant can rebut this presumption by clearly demonstrating that other alternatives are not available or are not less damaging. And we might request that you provide an alternatives analysis that we'll consider in our review. The overall purpose is the more specific and detailed purpose that we use to evaluate less environmentally damaging practicable alternatives. This is similar to Eagle's analysis of feasible and prudent alternatives. If a project does not comply with the guidelines, then we're required to deny the permit. When the coordination and evaluation is complete, we come to a permit decision. A permit could be issued as proposed, issued with modifications and or special conditions, or in rare circumstances denied. I say rare because throughout the permit evaluation process, we work with applicants to try to avoid this outcome by discussing potential project modifications that we might be able to authorize. Once you're issued a permit, if you find you need additional time to complete the work, you can request a time extension. We can consider time extensions if the proposed work is not changed and if the request is received before the permit expires. We recommend you apply at least 1 month before your permit would expire. If we can't grant a time extension, we might ask you to reapply for the project and to complete a new permit review process. In many cases, we can authorize modifications to issued permits. The Corps might be able to modify individual permits, usually in the case of minor changes that don't change the overall scope of the project. If there's a change in the project purpose, you might need a permit modification, or we may reevaluate the work for a new permit. For example, if you're issued a permit for wetland fill to build a convenience store, and then you decide you want to build a house on that wetland fill instead, we would probably need to reevaluate the project because the needs and constraints related to the project purpose have changed, and that could change the outcome of the alternatives analysis. So make sure that you have all necessary permits from both the Corps and Eagle before you begin any work. Also, it's very important to make sure all responsible parties have a copy of the permit and that they've reviewed the terms and conditions. The applicant, any consultants, engineers, or other agents, and their contractors should all have a copy of the permit so they can ensure that the work is conducted in accordance with the permit terms and conditions. Two of the questions that we get asked most frequently is how much will my permit cost and how long will the permit evaluation process take? So as far as cost, I have some good news for you. For general permits and letters of permission, there isn't any fee. For standard permits, they are free for units of government $10 for individuals and $100 for commercial entities. And this fee is charged at the time of permit issuance. So we don't have any application fee. And we also provide jurisdictional determinations, wetland boundary verifications, and pre-application meetings free of charge. So how long does it take us to reach a permit decision? The key point is that these timeframes begin once we receive a complete permit application. And so for 2023, we issued 88% of our general permits, which were the majority of the permits we issued, in less than 60 calendar days. And for individual permits, 64% were issued in less than 120 days. And this is an overview of where we have offices. Our main office is in Detroit, which is where Eric and I are both based out of, and the majority of our project managers are located. But we also have field offices in Bay City, Sault Ste. Marie, Marquette, Grand Haven, and South Bend. The one in South Bend covers these upper counties of Indiana and these two lower counties in Michigan. And our website is in the middle of being migrated. So this top link is a new overall district website, but they haven't yet moved all the regulatory part of the website yet. So that's the old link to that. But if you have any questions, feel free to give us a call. And that's the end of the presentation. So we will see what Elise has if I can
Yeah.
get out of here. Let me get out of everything.
Yeah. All right. We have 5 questions. Oh, actually, I think the first question you answered, which was how long does it typically take? Oh, no, actually, sorry. I'll read the first question. Sorry. The first question is how long does it typically take to get a jurisdictional determination? So that's
Do you
more
have
of a
any idea, Eric? Because I don't do that. That's usually our enforcement section. I don't know if you have any idea, Eric, how long they're taking.
I don't, as I do permit evaluation as well. However, I would say that they would be definitely related to time of year, size of the jurisdictional determination or the size of the area, as well as the availability of the compliance and enforcement personnel to get out there. But I would think that in any case, once the request comes in, that there would be a response to the requester within, I would say within 30 days to try to set something up, or at least to talk to the requester to get something set up when it's the most appropriate.
Okay. Um, Second question, are permits which have been issued available for public review? And probably a corollary to that would be how would you access those permits?
You can request a permit through the FOIA process. There is a section on the website for it. I don't know it offhand. I could send you the link, Elise, if you want to send it out to people later. I just there's a spot on the website, but I can't remember it off the top of my head what
Sure.
it is.
Okay, so there is an avenue to request a FOIA to
Yep,
review a
yep,
permit. Okay.
yep.
Um, Will the Corps provide a jurisdictional determination on property that is near me but is not owned by me? So do you, I suppose if you're curious about the regulatory status of property, but you're not the owner, are you allowed to request a jurisdictional determination?
Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think not. I think you have to be an owner or have some interest.
Or have some
Well,
authorization?
actually, there with the approved jurisdictional determination form, it does describe that in order for us to do an accurate jurisdictional determination on a property, we need to have permission from the property owner. So if you're not the property owner, then you have to gain permission from said property owner for us to gain access because we are not allowed to trespass. And so if we need to have access to that property to do an approved JD, then we will have to have proof of permission from the property owner itself. We may be able to give just a preliminary, if you are interested, and you could call or email our office about an area, we could do kind of a preliminary jurisdictional determination using aerial photography. But if it is to specifically give, for example, a delineation of a wetland, or specifically if that wetland is considered to be adjacent and we can't tell from aerial photography, we would have to access the property and would need permission from the property owner.
Great. Thanks, Eric. Um, Next question is, can you give an example of the analysis involved when a party wishes to fill a wetland to build a house? So what process would need to happen?
Well, first, it would depend on how large an amount of wetland you're proposing to fill, because in some cases that can be covered by a nationwide permit if it's small enough. If it has to go through the standard permit process, then we'd have to do a public notice, which takes 20 days. And then if we get comments, then you coordinate them with the applicant. And then we do an environmental assessment, which covers, like I was saying, the 404B1 analysis. So we'd likely ask you, what alternatives have you looked at? Is there somewhere else that doesn't involve wetland fill that you can build your house? And then you would, if there isn't, legitimately, you have to provide us reasons why it has to be in this wetland, basically, because it's not water dependent to
Right,
build your house in a wetland.
right. Great. Um, all right. What is the analysis for putting a boat hoist out in Grand Traverse Bay?
So Grand Traverse Bay is like, it's going to depend pretty much on where you are, but Grand Traverse Bay, like most of the places I can think of, is not super restrictive in terms of like, I used to work on the east side, where Eric is the chief of, and over there's a lot more canals, and then you're worried more about boat hoist blocking the canals if you had them on both sides the same length out. So Grand Traverse Bay, I don't think that would be as much of a problem. It'd be more making sure you're not blocking access for any of the adjacent property owners, and you would still need a permit from both the state and from us. More than likely, it would qualify for a regional permit, but we'd have to see the plans to know for sure.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, and if I may jump in there,
Sure.
essentially what we're looking at, what Rachel was saying, is navigational concerns. If that's one of our major concerns when we do analysis on the Great Lakes and issuing these permits for hoists and docks and all kinds of things, is navigation, to ensure that navigation is still flowing and adjacent property owners access to their property, docks or hoists, are not affected. And if they are, then we have to go through a more deeper analysis of that to try to determine if we can work with the applicant to either move the hoist. For example, a lot of times on the east side of the state, in the Detroit area, like Rachel had mentioned, that we have a lot of canals. And so we need to ensure that those adjacent property owners have the ability to access their docks and their hoists. And a lot of times what we will do is sometimes the applicant will propose a hoist on directly on the property line, which is in some cases will block access to from the other property. And so we'll work with them to try to get them to move it toward more the center of the property so that everyone can enjoy that navigation.
Great. You mentioned that the definition of adjacent has changed. So, what is the definition now?
Do you even know what it is now, Eric? It's changed so
That is
much.
a very good question. It has changed so much, and we just got new regulations to define what that is. And unfortunately for us, we are reactionary to what Congress, the rules that Congress gives us, and so we're still working through those kinks. About what exactly has changed. Most importantly, I think the biggest change is what we're seeing, at least in the Detroit district, is a majority of the adjacency now has to deal with surface connections. And so where before there were other types of connections that we could use to get jurisdiction over wetlands, having some sort of connection to navigable waters, but that has been reduced greatly. And so it's a very good question. I wish I had a straight up answer for you, but we don't even have a straight up answer now. We're still waiting guidance on that.
Okay. And then the last question I have here is, where are public notices published?
Those are on our website. Like I said, it's in the middle of being moved around. Like once it's all moved, I can also send you the new links so you can send it out to people. But yeah, every public notice gets put on our website. And
Okay.
there's also a list on there. I don't know, maybe Eric knows how often it gets updated of all the projects and who the project manager is for it. So if you're, that's one thing I didn't mention is like if you apply, we will send you an email telling you who the project manager is, like once we get your application.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it's monthly, Rachel. It might be plus or minus a month. And again, as Rachel mentioned, that our website is kind of in a bit of disarray as we just went undergone a huge revamp of our website. But in addition to the public notices, we do post a project pending list, which will give the Department of the Army file number that's associated with that project, the project name, what type of permit that it's being reviewed under, whether it's a standard permit, a letter of permission, nationwide permit, or regional permit, what county, what state, and the project manager and their contact information, or at least their phone number. No other information due to our limitation of personal identifying information is put on that list, but that is done I think on a monthly basis. If not, it could be bi-monthly.
Yeah, but in the email we send out, if you're the actual applicant or the agent for somebody, that will have like our contact phone number and our email for whoever your project manager is.
The questions continue to come in. So I have one more so far. This is your last chance, folks. If you do have a question, type it in. We did plan this to go till 4 o'clock, so we do have a little capacity for more questions, even though we've gotten quite a few today. So the next question is, Eric mentioned surface connections. Do those have to be permanent surface water connections, or can they be intermittent surface water connections?
Dave Dortman, I see your name
Yeah.
there. So, hi, Dave. That's a very good question, Dave. In fact, it may be both in certain circumstances. From what I understand, and again, I am putting out a disclaimer that I work with permit evaluation, and our jurisdiction stuff is really done by our compliance and enforcement branch. But there is mention of a surface connection. Intermittent may be able to extend that jurisdiction, but I'm not sure because we're still waiting on some guidance on that. But Dave, you can always get back to me later. You know how to reach me. And I'll get you with our compliance and enforcement chief, Don Ranke, and he may have a better idea for you. And that goes with any of the questions, folks, that we are given here. If you want to send your questions our way, we'll get them either through Rachel or through this whole thing here. So don't be
Yeah, I
afraid
can
if
put my email in the chat. I don't mind if you send me something to my email if you have questions that you think of later.
That was the last question. And I'm not seeing your email though in the
Huh?
chat.
What did I do with it? I thought I typed it in. I'll try again. Where did it go? Hmm. Maybe I'll just type it as an answer to Dave. Will that go to everyone?
No, it's only the
Oh, that's what I
ones run.
did.
Yeah, only the folks doing the running the webinar can see that.
Why isn't it letting me ask a question? That's weird.
Oh well.
Rachel, can you click on the chat screen and type it in chat? Will that work?
That's what I'm trying to figure out.
That
Oh, it looks like they can see it.
Yeah, they can see it. Okay.
Oh, okay. Maybe I'm
They
just
see
doing
it. We
weird.
just can't see it for some
Yeah.
reason.
Oh, maybe that's what's going on here. Anyway,
That's
well,
fine.
thank you both so much for your contribution, especially Rachel. That was very informative. I've worked in this industry for a long time, and I still learn new stuff. So it's always an evolving thing, and dealing with regulations and dealing with regulatory agencies. And we really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us today. So with that, I think I will stop the recording and end the webinar. Thank you all. Have a good day, everybody.
All right. Thank you, Elise.